have Raeesa Bulbulia, who is a pediatric occupational therapist and a mom to a child that needs specific medical care, has a special interest in children with differences. She's the founder of the Thezane Kargi Children's Fund and is passionate about inclusion, opportunity, and integration of kids with differences. Assalamu alaikum to you, Raeesa. Welcome to the program. And of course, we're going to be talking about something very close to your heart, and that's your little son, Thezane Kargi, whom, if I remember correctly, is 4 years old.
Yes, he's going to be 5 in January, inshallah.
Oh, alhamdulillah, that's wonderful. Quite a journey that you and your family have been through up to this point in time, but you wouldn't have it any differently because Zain is an absolute amanat from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For those of our viewers, I've talked with you plenty of times in the past, but for those of our new listeners and viewers who haven't heard or seen you before, what is the story with you as a mom, as a family, the mother of Thezane Kargi? How did it start?
So Zain is my actually second child. Let's say he was my second pregnancy. I'd lost my first pregnancy at 26 weeks. So I was exceptionally well looked after when I was pregnant with Zain to avoid any complications or issues in my second pregnancy. But Zain came early. He came at 35 weeks and he spent a few days in the neonatal ICU. And we were sent home and we were first-time parents and we were settling in. And as being an occupational therapist, I realized something's not quite right. He's not developing the way he should be developing. I'm doing all the kind of activities that I would do with the prem babies that I see, and I don't think he's strong enough. And that's kind of really where my journey started. I'd gone from pillar to post saying, something is wrong, something is wrong. And no matter where I turn.
Okay, we seem to have lost Raeesa there. Let's just see if we can reconnect to her. Unfortunately, there seems to be a fault on the line. But whilst my producer is busy getting her back online, let me just very quickly tell you that later on in the show, we'll be talking with Maulana Mohammed Tariq from Phoenix about the significance of Rabi al-Awwal. And we're also going to be having the Salam Media Quantum Private Game Reserve competition with an amazing prize up for grabs. So let's just see if we've managed to get Raeesa back online. Not yet. Just to give you a bit of a background, Raeesa is a pediatric occupational therapist. She's also mom to a child that needs specific medical care. Her son suffers from something called Pompey's disease, and she's not only fighting that cause, she wants to try and open up spaces for children with differences. She's the founder of the Thezane Kargi Children's Fund and is passionate about inclusion, opportunity, and integration of kids with differences. And we have her back online. I was just giving a bit of background. Right, back to you. Raeesa, you picked up as an occupational therapist that something was wrong with Zain. Looking back at that journey of yours, have you kind of tried to question what is it that the doctors were missing? What is it that the other medical professionals were missing?
So something that I consistently find, even to date, is that healthcare professionals are quick to dismiss what parents feel or think. You spend 24 hours with your child. You get to know what your child is doing, how they behave, what is different. And to date, I feel like we consistently have to fight to say, I know my child, I know something isn't okay. And I think thankfully now we actually have a medical team that listens, that includes us in Zain's journey and his healthcare. Because literally what I was told quite repeatedly was, oh, you're a first-time mom, you're being paranoid. Or I was told, oh, no, be a mom, don't be an occupational therapist. And I feel maybe perhaps our story would have been a little bit different. But we were diagnosed very late. Zain was only really diagnosed or anyone really took us seriously when he was in heart failure. He had a heart that was functioning at 21%. And that's really when somebody decided to look and say, oh, hang on, actually, there is a problem happening where when I started to pick up the motor related issues, Zane wasn't necessarily in heart failure and he wasn't in having breathing difficulties at 2 months or 8 weeks when we started to see the difference, rather than the 8 months where my child was literally dying. And when Zane was diagnosed, we were told it is a very late diagnosis for such a rare disease. The treatment needed to have been started by the time he was a few weeks old. So your outcomes aren't going to be as good, or if anything, you would be quite lucky if he makes it to his first birthday. And that's something else I always say. I don't let doctors tell us about a prognosis of my child, because at the end of the day, life, death, health, progress is in the hands of Allah. So we really put our
Absolutely.
and we say we take each day as it comes. And Zain has, alhamdulillah, done remarkably well. Like I said, inshallah, he'll be 5 in January. And he's defied many odds through his little journey. So Zain was diagnosed with a disease called Pompey's disease. It's a rare genetic disease. So my husband and I would have to be carriers of the disease. And he can't break down glycogen. So glycogen, we produce glycogen when we eat foods with sugars, to store for quick energy. And your entire body, all your muscles store glycogen for quick energy. So he started to excessively accumulate glycogen in his muscles. And what tends to happen is when you've got too much glycogen in your muscles, it becomes toxic and it starts to break the muscle cells, and then you get muscle weakness. So he was in heart failure because his heart was massive. His heart, when he was diagnosed, he was just over 6 kilos. His heart was 1.2 kilos. So he was in his heart was just enormous. I think it took up most of his chest cavity. And he was in heart failure. He was in heart and respiratory failure when he was diagnosed. We had gone through many doctors because nobody knew what was going on. So they could all tell me he's in heart failure, but nobody knew what the reason was. So we'd actually seen, I think, 5 cardiologists before we found his current cardiologist, who had seen the disease before, and he's currently managing the other patients with Pompey's disease. And he walked through the door and he said, oh, hang on, your child has Pompey's disease until proven otherwise. And I looked at him and I said, well, I don't think so. And he looked at me and he said, well, how do you know what Pompey's disease is? And the way the world works, I happened to see a little boy with Pompey's disease in my practice. And he looked at me and he said, walk out the door, go and find that mum, give her a call because she's going to become a very good friend of yours. And I picked up the phone and I called her and I said, my son's just been diagnosed with Pompey's disease. And she literally, her words to me later on was, I went cold on the phone. And she happens to be the founder of Rare Diseases South Africa. She founded Rare Diseases South Africa when her son was diagnosed, I think almost 10, 11 years ago now.
And he's doing well, is he not?
He's doing very well. He's doing exceptionally well. And she helped us significantly with our journey because she's walked the walk. So she could tell us how to get through the hard times, what to expect, even though our journeys are very, very different, but what to expect, how to keep motivated, and really how to keep fighting. And when I say keep fighting, I feel like that's exactly what we have to do every day for our little boy, to be included, to access the healthcare, the education system, the play environments, so forth, that he needs to be able to do because he is a child who's got different needs.
So you're now very passionate about issues around inclusion, integration, and children with differences. But with lockdown, with the entire world in the grips of this pandemic, COVID-19, obviously children like Zane and any other person with any form of fragility due to whatever their illness might be, this is not the world you want to expose your child to.
Of course.
You want to keep them as isolated as possible.
Oh, yes. So what actually happened is Zane had he used to have a tracheostomy, a breathing tube in his throat. We had that removed, and we had the little hole, the stomach closed earlier in the year, and we ran into a few more complications. And this happened to be just before this level 5 lockdown that we hit in March. And he spent 5 weeks in the ICU. And 5 weeks in the ICU with a 4-year-old is not easy. And we were discharged, I think it was the Monday, and we hit the level 5 lockdown on the Thursday. And we had said, oh my goodness, that was an exceptionally hard hospital stay. We have to do everything we can to keep this little boy safe. It's a new virus, and already, all these protocols of sanitization and not coming into contact with people who are sick and so forth. That was part of our normal routine.
Daily routine.
Yes, absolutely. So we already put all these precautions into place before the virus was around. But we had to kind of up our game and be like, no, hang on, we need to put in some more precautions. We can't take him out. So Zane, naturally, he was well socialized, integrated. He started a little play group this year. He attends therapy. We take him out, meets friends, families, those kind of things. And we had to put everything on hold because we don't know the predictability and outcomes of this virus and how we'd manage to it, especially because he gets so sick so quickly and there's no vaccination yet. So, and we take every possible vaccination. So he's flu vaccinated and RSV vaccinated, and every possible vaccination that he can get, he gets every year. And then we tend to lock down in winter because he tends to pick up a bug in winter, and often it's something small that me and you may get, and gets a bit snotty and coughy for a few days, and then we're okay. But he ends up in the hospital. So we had to put things into place this year to make sure that we wouldn't pick up anything. Alhamdulillah, he's been well. He has been homebound, and we've had to have a big change in lifestyle. So we are limiting our interactions with others in terms of like his therapy, all that kind of thing happens online. And thankfully, we can do that online, because if we didn't have the technology to be able to do these things online, that would be a step back for Zane, because he does physiotherapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, feeding therapy, everything online. So we need to be able to do these things. So we keep going with that. We, alhamdulillah, managed to take 2 small little breaks out into the open, just for a change of environment, because we were kind of climbing up our own walls at home.
I'm sure.
But he's very into his routine now. He'll tell you have to sanitize, which is something he has to do before, but he's a bit more aware of it now. The social distancing is hard, so he wants to, as any 4-year-old, and he's so loving. So I want to hug and kiss my grandparents, and I want to hug and kiss and play with my cousin and his cousin. But he is very aware that he needs to follow the protocols and the regulations that we put into place to keep him safe and healthy. And actually, yesterday we were having dinner with my in-laws, and on the way there, I'm telling him, remember, we are going to eat, but you need to make sure you keep a social distance. You don't hug and kiss everybody, and because that's the first thing he wants to do. And he says, no, Mom, I know, but I'm so tired of this corona. When is this corona gonna go away?
But it's not only the corona, it's his condition as well. So yes. In terms of, diet, do you have a very special diet? And I do know that the Pompey's community internationally is very, very small. So I should imagine you have this close-knit community that you're in contact with all the time. Just kind of express or explain to our viewers how difficult, how challenging. And alhamdulillah, I know that you take it in your stride. Your mom talks about just what an amazing mother you are. And alhamdulillah, Allah's given you that capacity, but just how much of a challenge it is for parents with a child with this type of a rare disease.
So Zane has quite a few significant needs. One you mentioned about feeding is that Zane has always struggled with feeding since he was born, from breastfeeding, bottle feeding, and then I remember when we started solids, that was exceptionally challenging. And I remember I'd go 4 or 5 days at a time, and I wouldn't, if I could get in 2 spoons of food, I'd be like, oh my goodness. And I remember the once just sitting on the floor and crying, because I know it's now day 4 or 5 and I haven't got anything into my child's system. And what it actually happened is he had his lung collapse just before his 2nd birthday. And he had to have a breathing tube put in to help him get that lung back up and ease his breathing. And when they put in that breathing tube, they put in a feeding tube. It's called a peg, and it's a little button that sits on that goes straight into his tummy. And it was something that we were trying to avoid. There were 2 things we tried to avoid. One was the tracheostomy, the breathing tube, and the other one was his peg. And I think it's always the fear of the unknown. It's something you see, you hear about, you read about, you think of quality of life, and you think first thing, number one, it makes my child different. And number 2, it it's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. And it was two things that we did for Thezane that once we did, I have never, ever looked back. It just,
Wow.
I was worried about the quality of life. It completely changed the quality of his life. He went from a child who was struggling to breathe to a child who could now live and play and be a little boy because he was breathing so well. And then the feeding tube took the pressure off us trying to eat and feed him. Um, because of the breathing tube, for the first 3 months, they actually stopped all form of, when he was in the hospital, all forms of oral feeding, which set us back because he actually stopped oral feeding. He didn't want to eat or drink or anything. They literally stopped everything because they were worried about him choking. And because the tube sits quite far down his throat, he'd gag quite often and then throw up. And they were quite worried that if he'd thrown up, he would then aspirate on his vomit. So while he was in the hospital, they said, let's just hang tight, let him adjust. And then when you're discharged, we can start to introduce these kind of things again. So he still has a feeding tube, which we give him most of his feeds with. He does feeding therapy, and feeding therapy helps him to understand how to be able to feed. So he drinks really nicely. He likes to drink juices. He'll put in a standard order with my mom for red juice, which is the beetroot, carrot, apple juice, milkshakes, tea, that kind of thing. He will drink nicely. He likes soups quite a bit. But most of his nutritional needs are still met with a G tube, which means, and what I do is I cook foods according to his nutritional needs. I blend the feeds, and then it goes directly into his tummy. Interestingly enough, Zane is a child who absolutely loves to cook and bake. So he will help me every day cooking and baking. And yesterday I actually had a follow-up with his dietitian just to check that what I'm feeding him is okay and the quantities are okay and he's growing okay. And he's laughing and he's telling her on the phone, I help my mom make my blended feeds. I cook them and everything. He's telling her what happens and how. So he's very aware of what works and how it works for him.
So now we are in lockdown. We still are, and you need to take extra precautions with Zane. And obviously you are looking long term now. You're concerned not only about your own son, but other children with differences, with disabilities or special needs. What are you planning? Whom are you going to be talking to about this? Is it the school situation? Where exactly are you targeting this this whole pitch of the fact that you feel children with special needs need to be accommodated more and to a great extent?
So, look, through our journey, so with my work, dealing with children who have differences, as well as with meeting more and more families who've got children with, whether it's the smallest difference to maybe it's children with much more significant difficulties. And when you talk to parents, you kind of come across the same thing over and over again. Parents who are needing to literally fight and push to have their children recognized, included, or accommodated in any way. And it will be small things that I find quite unacceptable. So whether it's things like accessibility, so our schools, our parks, our malls, our places of social gatherings equipped to deal with children with mobility issues, movement-related issues. Are they able to accommodate kids who have autism, kids who have differences? And I think quite an interesting example for me was a little girl that I had been seeing for quite a few years, actually from when she was a few months old, who had Down syndrome. And a really bright child. Her mom had actually done everything right for this girl to set her up to thrive. And when it came to schooling, there was no place for her. Because where was she supposed to go? Was she supposed to be remedial schooled? Was she supposed to be in a mainstream school with accommodations? And there was such a challenge. And the first thing this little girl was based on was, no, we do not accept a child with Down syndrome. Or no, we do not accept a child with mobility issues. And this seems to be a common trend. And this is noticing now when we are looking at schools for Zane. So Zane is cognitively intact. He's a bright little boy, but he is not mobile. He is somebody who needs a walker or a wheelchair to help him get around. So he has that extra need at the moment.
Okay,
After,
there's a bit of disturbance on the line. Let's just see if we can fix that. But we've almost come to the end of the interview. Can we just try and get Raeesa back online? I need to share some very important information. Rather, I want her to share some very important information. Raeesa, there you are. We've almost come to the end of the interview. But I guess the inclusion issue will have to wait possibly once the lockdown is over, once we get to back to our new normal. But
absolutely.
very quickly, before I let you go, I want you to talk about, I think it's a brilliant initiative, the Thezane Children's Fund.
So the Thezane Children's Fund, we started about 2 years ago now. We realized there's so many children who need assistive devices that can change the quality of their lives, whether it's something as simple as a hearing aid to a walker, a wheelchair, a communication device. And these devices are exceptionally expensive. Expensive so that when you already have a child with difficulties and you have to worry about so many other things, these devices often get pushed to the end of the list. So we started the fund to be able to provide these devices, particularly to families who cannot afford them. And alhamdulillah, we have had such an incredible community feedback and support. So we really run on fundraising and donations. And then we get a lot of applications. Our applications go through quite rigorous screening. So the families who apply to the fund have to be eligible for to receive the assistance from the fund. So what we tend to do then is, so the application will come in, it will go through our board, it requires financials and so forth from the family who's applying, and then if they're eligible, we can provide the assistive devices. And it has been phenomenal in terms of the feedback we've gotten from both people who've received from the fund as well as people who've donated to the fund.
Wow.
Which is really, really been fantastic. So your listeners can definitely have a look. We have a Facebook page. It's called the Thezane Children's Warrior Fund. And we do tend to post with permission of the families that we've been helping what we've been doing. Recently, there was a little boy who was abandoned because he was born disabled. He was born without one arm and one leg. And we just got him fitted with a prosthetic arm and a prosthetic leg, and that has changed his life tremendously. And he's not even a year yet.
Wow. Raeesa, let's talk very, very quickly about, obviously, with Zane's condition and with coronavirus, children like Zane won't be able to get into a normal school environment. Have you kind of thought that through? And what would your advice be to other parents in a similar situation? That's question number 2. And question number 3, I'm so sorry I'm throwing everything at you, is have you heard since the birth of Zane in South Africa, have you heard of any other children being born with Pompey's disease?
So there haven't been any other kids born with Pompey's disease after Zane. The Pompey's community is quite small in South Africa. I think they're under 10 adults and children. Zane, I think, I stand to be corrected, but I think he's the youngest child with Pompey's disease. In terms of schooling, next year I'm still looking at online schooling because the virus is very much still around. And then we'll need to look at grade R learning in 2022. And next year I will start my hunt of schools that I think would be appropriate.
Now, I know the mother the lady that has started up the Rare Disease Foundation, her son, I think you said, is about 11 years old. If you don't mind, please indulge us. Does he go to a regular school? How normal is his situation, and how have they adapted? Because I know you're in very close contact with them.
So yes, he's at a normal mainstream school. I think the school does make accommodations for him here and there when he needs the accommodations. He is more mobile than Zane, so he's able to walk. He is able to walk. The other little boy, as a matter of fact, that I know, I think he's 8. He's 8 years old. He actually stays not too far from me, so he's at a school around in my area as well. He's at a mainstream school, and the school also makes accommodations for them. So like I said, the biggest concern for us is the kids are not cognitively affected, but they are maybe physically challenged. So those kids that can walk get tired easily, so they still require some mobility devices or assistance, or fatigue quite easily, and then the schools need to make the accommodations for them.
Finally, Raeesa, and I really do commend you for starting this fund, Thezane Children's Fund, and it's for any and every obviously difficulty that a child might have and the support that they need. What advice do you want to leave our viewers with this morning? People who may have a child, a loved one, or even an adult who's got some form of a mental or a physical difficulty. What is the one piece of sound advice you can give them just to make their journey a little easier?
So I want to say two things. One, when it rains and it pours, the sun will come out. It really does. You have your moments of that are challenging, that are difficult, but you keep going, and it does get easier. It does get better. The one thing I want to say, and I think maybe this is a good opportunity to say it, and I was actually speaking to somebody recently who's got a family member who is severely disabled, and it's actually an adult, and she was saying that this family member is severely depressed at the moment because they keep being told, so it's a husband and there's a wife, and the wife keeps on saying, or the wife's family keeps on saying to the husband and the husband's family, you are creating the Jannah for your wife. She's got to put up so much. You are creating her Jannah. You are creating her Jannah. And it's something that we get told quite frequently. Allah will give you Jannah for what you do for your son. And I think there's people mean well, but I always say, think about the person on the other side of that. So,
and the present reality of the family.
That's it. So, are we creating an impression that that child or that person who is disabled or needs more care, are we creating the impression that they are a burden? Because I will tell you, my child is most definitely not a burden. And it's something that people will tell me often. They'll say, I don't know how you do it. And I'm like, no. That's not it. It's you are a parent or you are a caregiver. You do absolutely everything because at the end of the day, it's your child or it's your spouse or father or mother or whoever it is that needs extra care. And it's never we should never make the person that we're caring for feel burdensome, because that is absolutely not what they are. And somebody asked me the other day, if you knew your child was going to have a rare disease, would you have that child? And of course, I would never want my child to have a rare disease. But knowing my child, I wouldn't have it any other way. And I still would do absolutely everything and anything to care for my child.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue blessing you with the patience, the perseverance to continue, and may He grant you complete health going forward, inshallah. You are an amazing young lady. What a pleasure talking to you. Can people contact you directly if they need to ask you any questions, or if they just need to talk?
Absolutely.
Okay, brilliant. So if they get in touch with us, we'll pass them on to you. But give us that website address again, or the Facebook page.
It's the Thezane Kargi Children's Warrior Fund, and all our details are on the page.
Brilliant. Wonderful talking to you, and take care of yourself, and a kiss to Zain from me. Assalamu alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum salam.
That was Raeesa Bulbulia, a pediatric occupational therapist and a mom to a child that needs specific medical care. He suffers from a very, very rare condition called Pompey's disease. It is 12:37. In a short while, we'll be joined by Maulana Muhammad Tariq from Phoenix to talk about the significance of Rabiul